Every
Mm,
time I manage to do something, I'm like, oh, it's because I over prepped.
mm,
And so having more achievements doesn't really help my imposter syndrome. It just
mm.
drags it along. That's when I started to cherish even more those connections. And that's how, in parallel, I also built my Vietnamese identity in a more stronger way, where I chose the things that I liked more about Vietnam and I chose the things that I liked more about Western culture. I was doing like this really intensive prep school in France, and it was really hard, and I was very stressed. And my parents started to be like, like you could quit if you want. Like, you don't need to always like strive
Yeah,
so hard. And I was like, I can't. Like, you built me this way for 18 years, and now you're telling me to quit? Like, how?
cool. Kieu Me, I'm very excited to be chatting with you today. We've been connected on LinkedIn a while, talked here and there a bit, but I'm very curious to learn a bit more officially from you and also sharing this to the wider OV audience. So thanks for being on the podcast. Why don't you give us a quick introduction about yourself?
Thanks a lot for having me, of course. I'm saying hi in remote to all our audience in OV. So I was born in Vietnam. Then I grew up in Switzerland for 10 years because my dad was working in diplomacy at the time. Then I spent 1 year in Vietnam, no, sorry, 2 years and a half in Vietnam for my high school before going to France to study. So I've been here for 10 years now. In between, I spent 1 year in New York, 6 months in London for work. So yeah, I've been moving quite a lot, working at BCG now, and it's also making me move a lot for my work. So yeah, that's a bit about me.
Thanks. And I hear multiple cultures, countries, probably cultural influences, mainly three, probably Swiss, Vietnamese, French. How is that for you in the sense that how do you define your own identity? Would you say you grew up mainly Vietnamese? Or what's the strongest influence for you?
Yeah, I think that it's a very interesting question because I've asked myself that question, I think almost my entire life. Because when I went to Switzerland, of course, I was fully Vietnamese at the time, right? I was six, and
Mm,
it was the only language I knew even at the time. And for 10 years, of course, I built my that kind of Swiss identity because I was going to the Swiss school, etc. And I arrived at a moment when I was a teenager, went to Vietnam, where I was almost like avoiding that identity because I wanted to fit in wherever I was, which was in the West. So
mm,
I was kind of didn't want to be Vietnamese. And I had my dad at the time who always, as far as I could remember, told me, you will be Vietnamese, like you will be a Vietnamese person
mm,
however, wherever you go, like you will be Vietnamese, and that nobody can take that from you.
mm,
And at the time, it made me a little bit frustrated because it's like, it's something that I cannot choose because, teenager, I wanted to be, you know, like a Western girl.
mm,
And then I arrived in Vietnam, spent 2 years and a half there,
mm,
and learned as like a young, I mean, teenager slash trying to become adult thing, built my liking, my love, my Vietnamese identity as well.
mm,
And then as I moved to France for 10 years, I felt like progressively I've become more and more Vietnamese,
mm,
which was very weird because I was far from Vietnam for 10 years. But I think that also as I grew up, I understood more what my dad was saying by saying, you will be Vietnamese wherever you go, and nobody can take that from you. And as I built my French identity, I also built my Vietnamese identity in kind of like not a position, but I chose the things that I liked more about Vietnam. I saw the things that I didn't like about French culture and that I preferred in Vietnamese culture. So yeah, so now whenever people tell me like, where are you from? I would just say Vietnam for the short version. And then I
mm.
would explain like, yeah, but I also grew up in Switzerland and in France and blah, blah, blah.
And just quickly on the Vietnam small 2 year period you had. I think this was a time where you were young, meaning you were building your circles of friends, and all of a sudden you switch from Switzerland to Vietnam, which is a completely different world. You make friends during those 2 years, and then you switch back. Like, how was it for little Gilmy, those transitions?
Yeah, I think that it was really hard, but then as well, especially as a teenager, you're like so attached to your friends and to your environment because you're also building your identity and building your personality.
Mm-hmm.
It was very hard at the time. I cried a lot, and it was like the drama of my life. Like my life was ending.
Mm-hmm.
But I made a lot of friends in Vietnam in the French high
Mm-hmm.
school, and they are now my best friends. So we've been far from each other for 10 years because each person kind of went to another country. And I think that they resonated with me in a way that I couldn't even see before
Mm-hmm.
because they also had that dual identity thing. Like they were also Vietnamese, but went to the French high school, so they also had that Western influence.
And did you grow up bilingual with French? So was it French Swiss?
Yes, yes, yes. So when I was a kid growing up in Switzerland, my parents forced me to do Vietnamese. Like I was basically by schooling. So I was going to the school Swiss school,
Mm-hmm.
and then I was following the entire program in the Vietnamese programs. I was doing math, literature, history, everything in
Oh.
Vietnamese at home.
But who taught you? Your parents?
Oh, my parents, yeah.
Oh wow. Okay.
My parents, they were like making me do math and everything in Vietnamese at
Uh-huh.
home. So then I was finishing my homework, and then I had like another set of homework that I was doing. And they were very diligent. And every weekend, I remember it was like school day. So there was no, I mean, there was the weekend, but there was always like, I think Sunday where the entire day I was doing like more stuff than the other days. And that I think really participated to building a real dual identity as well because I had like two separate schools and two separate languages and two separate like math and all those things. And yeah, I'm infinitely grateful for my parents for having done that because oh my God, it's like so much time invested.
Yes. And it sounds like they were quite intentional and diligent then. And
Yeah.
you went on to join institutions like BCG, and I would just be curious to know. And BCG is hyper competitive, right? To get in, especially in Europe. And I would love to know: do you think that drive of yours to succeed in your career, especially in this more traditional way, has been driven by your parents and they planted the seed, or do you think your environment and your friends back in the days also influenced that?
I think that as my parents invested so much time in my education, and as they were also, as you say, very intentional in the way that they built my personality or whatever, really had a big influence. And I think that they still have a big influence now in the sense that even though they don't work at BCG, but I still like tell them a lot about what I do and like
Mm.
how it's hard or how it's interesting.
Yeah.
But my choice for yeah, I think that I remember when I was 6, I arrived at school and it was really hard, right? I didn't speak the language, nothing. Like I
Mm.
was just arriving. I still have that image of me going to that, like when I was 6, it was the first day of school. I was going in the classroom
Mm-hmm.
and I couldn't speak. I felt like I couldn't speak and I couldn't hear. And then about the excellence part, I think that starting from grade 3, I still remember a day where I went to my mom and I was like, Mom, I understand them. Like I understood everything almost today. And my mom was like, Oh wow, congratulations. I don't know. And then I started having really good grades. Like from grade 3, I started to be like second, first of the class. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that maybe that entire frustration built up for like 2 years or
Yeah.
2 years and a half. And then at some point, I suddenly felt like I could do stuff, that I could communicate, that I could have good grades. And yeah, from then on, I always had really good grades. And of course, my parents insisted for me to have good grades and to work hard. And yeah, I think that it kept going on. And I remember when I was 18, my
Mm-hmm.
parents, I was doing like this really intensive prep school in France, which was like the way to go into the top schools.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really hard and I was very stressed. And my parents started to be like, like you could quit if you want. Like you don't need to always like strive
Yeah.
so hard. And I was like, I can't. Like you built me this way for 18 years and now you're telling me to quit? Like how? So then I
Mm-hmm.
just pushed through. After the first year, I pushed through and then went to got HSC. And yeah, so I think that my parents like progressively started to become more like a calming force from when I was 18, but it was kind of too late.
Mhm. Beautiful, and it's I say beautiful because I think it's a beautiful immigrant story there. And just to go a bit deeper on your upbringing or growing up in France, what was that time like for you, being basically Vietnamese immigrant in France, working hard? What were the parts that you enjoyed, and what made you become who you are today?
So I arrived in France when I was 18, was doing this really intensive thing like for 2 years. So I felt like I was living almost not really in France at the
Mm.
time. I was more like living in my school.
Okay.
And as I think that those 2 years, it was especially hard because I felt the for the first time how it was hard to have my parents so far because it was also the first time I was living like 10,000 kilometers from my parents. And it was very intense. And all my classmates had their parents around, so they could go. Some were living at their parents,
Mm.
and some could go to their parents for every holiday or every weekend.
Mm.
And so it was more like I felt how, yeah, disadvantaged I was compared to the others.
Mm.
But it's also but I think that it's a situation that every student going abroad to study has, right? And a lot of Vietnamese students, I think I saw the stats, it's like an incredible amount of people going
Yeah.
to study abroad compared to the GDP that we have.
Mm.
And and yeah, so I felt that really hard, like how I was disadvantaged compared to the other people. I started building my French identity starting when I started HSC, so after the 2 years.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that it was very natural because I had grown up in Switzerland before, and then I did the French high school, so it was very natural. And but then, so for I think 6 years, I didn't too much see my Vietnamese friends
Mm.
because I wanted to really started to fit in and to, yeah, like do all the activities that we had at HSC to have new friends and all those things. But then after I graduated, or even towards the end, I started to really feel that want to go to Vietnam, to
Mm.
go back to Vietnam at some point, to be closer to my parents. And I also started to feel the bits and differences that I preferred in Vietnamese culture, like sense of the family, that the family is so important for us, or yeah, the entrepreneurial spirit as well. I think it's very Vietnamese.
Yeah.
So yeah, all those things I started to feel way more with my closest friends from high school. And
Mm.
so of course, I maintain communication, like I talk to them regularly, but that's when I started to cherish even more those connections. So yeah, and that's how in parallel I also built my Vietnamese identity in a more stronger way where I chose the things that I liked more about Vietnam and I chose the things that I liked more about Western culture.
Mm. And was BCG your first job out of school?
Yes, I mean, yes, it was my first job
Mm.
out of school, but I also did 1 year of internship before that. So it was not really my first job. And I
Okay.
chose it in a position to something else.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Would love to learn more about that journey of when that goal crystallized, and you were becoming determined to do consulting. How was the journey like for you?
Yeah, so that was long.
Mm.
So my dad wanted me to do finance again. Influence of my parents.
Yeah.
When I started looking for my internships, I was like, yeah, I absolutely need to do finance because it's like super well paid, and my dad tells me that it's the best thing to do, and blah blah blah.
Mm-hmm.
So then I did almost all my internships in finance except one,
Mm-hmm.
which was in influencer marketing. But anyway, so I spent my entire gap year doing finance,
Yeah.
working at EY in transaction services, and then working in a small private equity firm in New York.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think that I did a case team assistant, like small case team assistant job,
Mm-hmm.
3 weeks in BCG Vietnam.
Mm.
And suddenly I was like, wow, this is so intense, but this is so fun. I
Mm.
actually like this. And so I put into my head that I wanted to do consulting when I graduate. But then I
Mm.
still had 1 year of school. And at that time, I had already chosen finance as my major because my dad had told me, you
Mm.
have to do finance. I wanted to do, I wanted to major in entrepreneurship at
Mm.
first. And my dad was like, what do you mean? What do you mean entrepreneurship? Like, what are you going to do? Like, what are you going to learn there? And in parallel, I was preparing for all the cases to go into consulting. I liked it more than the classes. Like I was looking forward to going out of the class so that I could go case with my friends. So then, yeah, just spent a lot of time casing, really liked it. So reinforced that I wanted to go into BCG. And yeah, then got into BCG. And actually, I still had another internship at the end.
Mm.
So I went to intern at Blackstone in London, and they were paying me really well, and they
Mm.
gave me a return offer. And
Mm.
then it was so hard. Like it was I think it was like 2 months where I was like, what should I do? Because it
Mm.
was like Paris BCG and Blackstone London.
Yeah.
It was huge money in London versus, of course, like good pay, but not as good as Blackstone.
Mm.
It was my parents telling me that finance was the best thing to do. And oh, by the way, I wanted to become a banker from
Mm.
when I was 8. So
Mm.
it was a very ingrained, like,
Eight. Wow.
want. Yeah, 8 years
Mm.
old,
Mm.
went to my parents and said, I want to become a banker. They were like, what? What do you mean? I'm not even sure I knew what bank meant at the time.
Mm.
But it was just this very, very flashy thing in Switzerland, I think.
Mm.
And on the other side, a career path that I think my parents didn't really understand as well, and that
Yeah.
not many people understand in general, because I think it's very broad what we are doing.
Mm.
I was very lucky to have that choice in the first place. It was
Mm.
COVID at the time. A
Mm.
lot of people were not even getting an offer, and so I was very lucky, and I understood as well that luck that I had, so I didn't want to waste it, you know.
Mm.
But yeah, in the end, I chose BCG because I figured out that I liked the internship I did at BCG more than the internship I did in New York.
Yeah.
I figured that I loved learning and that BCG was all about like learning, because every time you go on a case, every 2 months, you're learning about a new topic, new industry, new people, new company.
Mm.
And I also like the fact that we could move for our job, that we had the possibility to go to other places.
Mm.
And I think that that comes from the fact that, of course, my dad was a diplomat in Switzerland, but he also moved a lot. Like I remember South America at some point, and then
Yeah.
Northern Europe, etc. And I guess that I always grew up like looking up to the stories he was telling a lot,
Mm.
and I think that that also like underground drove me towards that.
Super interesting. I think there are no really wrong choices between the two, in some way, and it's really luxury, full of two options. And I'm sure if you're that kind of person, then you would have succeeded in any option. But I would be curious, was getting the offers and getting into those companies something that was easy for you, or not too difficult, or what was the journey like for you? And you compete with such A type kind of people. Like, what was that like for you?
I think there are, I mean, I'll talk about maybe Blackstone first and then
Mm.
BCG, but I think there are some elements from Blackstone that are replicable as well. But actually, I didn't even apply to Blackstone because I
Oh.
felt that I was not good enough.
Mm-hmm.
Like I have such, and I think still now,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of women, I think, especially women of color, I had such a huge imposter syndrome. Like I remember going to the finance fair at our
Mm-hmm.
school, and I didn't even go to the Blackstone stand. Like I didn't even go meet the people
Yeah.
because I felt like I was not good enough. Because I felt like, yeah, you needed to be like more intelligent or more aggressive or more
Mm-hmm.
whatever to be there. And I remember all the guys from my from my class, of course, they went there to
Yeah.
meet the people. I didn't even like dare going. And then after the finance fair, we still gave our CV into a CV book. And then they, like our school sent the CV book to all the companies that were there. So I still made my CV book like everyone, and then I gave it. And then 2 weeks after the fair, they contacted me. The HR from Blackstone contacted me, and she was like, "Oh, we saw that you had a real estate experience in New York. We think that this role might fit you. Do you want to interview?" I was like, I mean, what? Of course, like if Blackstone tells me to interview, I would take the chance. And I just worked really hard. And I remember people telling me, yeah, you should do 50 cases in order to get into those companies. Some people told me 70. I was like, okay, I'm gonna fix myself 70 minimum. And in the end, I think I did like 120 cases.
Like live cases with people or?
Yeah.
Okay.
And each case lasts about 1 hour and a half to 2 hours. Depend, like, because you give feedback to the person as well. So yeah, I did 120 live cases, and then I worked, like I also studied, I took a course, whatever. So yeah, it was not easy. It was not easy. Some people were telling me, yeah, I got an offer after 5 cases. I was like, no, this is not me. Like I'm gonna over prep, whatever. I also over prep because it was COVID. So the day of my BCG interview, the first BCG interview, was also the day that our president called for the confinement, for the lockdown, sorry. So then it got canceled. It was March 2020, 2021, I
Yeah.
think, 2020. So then I pushed my interview to December. So then I had another 9 months. So it wasn't really purposefully that I did so many cases, but it worked out in the end.
Very interesting, and sounds very intense. Now, having worked a few years in consulting, do you think you've become less, same, or more intense? And did the work become more intense, or has it, have you built your own ways of becoming more effective and more leveraged, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just before the manager level.
Yeah.
So it's the level where you're supposed to be, yeah, knowing what you're doing. And yeah, because with 2 years, 3 years, you've been doing more or less the same thing. But and it's also supposed to be the moment where you get a little bit more of work-life balance.
Yeah.
But I haven't really seen it because, when you know more, when you can do more, then people will give you more.
Yeah.
It's always like that. So no, it has not gotten less intense. I think that the last project that I did was like the most intense, but also the most pressuring one, the most stressful one that I had because I had more responsibility. And because we had to deliver and it was very innovative, it was in Gen AI, so it was like we had never done that before. So it was very stressful. So no, it has not gotten less intense. It's still as interesting. I still feel like every time I go on a project, I get this new adrenaline of, oh, I'm gonna learn a new thing. It's so interesting. I still get the stress as well of like, oh my God, like, can I do this? Like, am I at the right place? Imposter syndrome going back all the time. And every time it still goes well. It still goes very well at the end. But I think that it's a bit inherent to the job because it's very hard, if you think about it, it's very hard to learn about a brand new industry, function, company in such a short amount of time. Like week one, you're trying to ramp up, but you're also supposed to start going in front of the client and say stuff as well. It's not like, they just put you in a room and you can just learn everything. No, you also have to learn a lot on the job. And so, yeah, like it is just inherent to the job that it's very intense and it's very hard. And yeah, I haven't really found yet someone that would have told me that it was not intense and that it was easy.
And then on the more mental or more psychological side of things, you mentioned imposter, but you've been doing this for a while now, and I think you've been intense throughout your life. Do you think, even though your physical and execution is as intense and as effective, are you more relaxed mentally as you get older and replace the imposter with real confidence over time? Or is the level of like insecurity or imposter still the same?
So for sure, I'm less stressed than when I was 18 and when I was 20. I'm way more grounded. Like,
Mm.
thank God, because I would not have managed at BCG otherwise. And BCG has also, as you say, confronted me to my weaknesses. And I
Mm.
think that's why it's also a very good school, because they call it like a school for your career, because you're doing so much intense stuff, and because you're always being, and it sounds very intense, but always analyzed. Like after every project they
Yeah.
analyze you on like 20 dimensions, and they grade you from 1 to 5, and they like write stuff about you, and then every 6 months you have a performance review where they look at that like with a magnifying glass, and yourself as well. It pushes you to look yourself at yourself with a magnifying glass.
Mm-hmm.
And so yes, it has really confronted me to the my weaknesses, and I think that it's also the best. It's also hard, but it's also the best way to evolve. They give me a coach, so like a personal coach to
Mm-hmm.
work with on that.
Can you share a bit about the coaching? How did he or she develop your confidence?
I specifically told the coaching company that I wanted someone to work on the symptom, but also on the root causes.
Mm-hmm.
What I know is that on Tuesday, we're going to do 2 hours where I'm going to do my lifeline. So I'm going to tell her basically all the things that I think have shaped me into the person that I am and that contributed to my imposter syndrome. And then I know that her method is that she will do kind of like a psychoanalysis kind of thing,
Mm.
but also she will be, because what she said is that sometimes, you just tell yourself a story. Like you tell yourself that you have imposter syndrome,
Yeah.
but is it really imposter syndrome? Is it
Mm.
imposter syndrome only in certain situations? And so rephrasing your story into, I have imposter syndrome, for instance, when I'm working in oil and gas,
Mm.
but I don't have imposter syndrome when I work in marketing,
Mm-hmm.
that already can shape more like your brain into like just changing your story about yourself
Mm-hmm.
can also like change the way that you actually behave.
Yeah.
So that's what I know about her method, and I took her especially because of that, you telling yourself a story thing. I found that very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So that's her method. Otherwise, I think that yeah, it's also a lot of journaling
Mm.
helps, has helped me a lot.
Yeah.
And meditation as well. I meditate
Mm.
a lot.
Mm.
Yoga gives me confidence.
Mm.
And also just really focusing on what we are good at. I think that every human being is kind of like, if you're like, if you're a square, you cannot
Mm.
fit into a rounded thing. And so because you're constantly trying to fit into something, you cannot have self-confidence, because self-confidence is first like knowing that I am a unique person,
Mm.
and knowing that I have these unique set of skills, and just being confident about them.
Mm.
Because how I have, a lot of people tell me like, oh, but how can you not, how can you still have imposter syndrome? You went to like the hardest prépa in France, and then you went to the best business school in France, and then you went to BCG. Like, how can you have imposter syndrome? And I'm like, yeah, but the thing is that because I'm very like over prepping stuff, every
Mm.
time I manage to do something, I'm like, oh, it's because I over prepped.
Mm.
And so having more achievements doesn't really help my imposter syndrome. It just
Mm.
drags it along. It
Mm.
just drags it on. And you can also say that my imposter syndrome pushes me to be very hardworking, to be very diligent. And so it gives me those achievements. So it's also a positive thing. But yeah, I think that arriving, when you're 28, I'm like, okay, so this is the work of the year, and it's been the work of 2024. It will be
Mm.
the work of at least H1 2025. So yeah.
Very candid sharing, and I think it's very interesting, and to me personally, fascinating to talk about imposter syndrome, because I do see a lot of high performing people having that, and the question that I ask myself is often, you have that imposter syndrome, but you still achieve things. So there's clearly this gap that you still do things despite having those doubts, right? And so my next question would really be, how do you bridge that? Even if you're not too confident, how do you still follow through? You mentioned, I think, yoga, meditation. Is there some mental model, or some like, how do you cope with stress and those moments where you have doubts?
I think that I'm very disciplined with
Mm-hmm.
myself because my parents were really disciplined with me.
Mm-hmm.
So once I have like a goal in mind, I know like the different stuff. Like I put my brain into putting the different stuff. And then when I'm in execution mode, I don't really have that that emotion side anymore. And actually I just realized that now that it's true that it helps to just burst out the emotion and put it by the side.
Mm-hmm.
As long as you know that it's your way of coping with things,
Mm-hmm.
it's fine, right?
Mm-hmm. And is this still ongoing? Is this today still the case?
Yeah, I detach myself way more from that. And I think that this work with self-confidence, with putting aside imposter syndrome is going to help as well
Mm-hmm.
to just be really confident about the things that I can do
Mm-hmm.
and looking at my capacity in a more objective way.
Mm. I love this conversation, by the way, and very honest, sharing, and vulnerable, which is, really the magic of such conversations. And I would love to go a bit deeper into, your day to day and your life. How do you structure your stressful, intense life, and what are some of the routines or perhaps systems you've built for yourself to execute effectively through the day?
Work-life balance is a really big thing
Mm.
in consulting. During the first year and a half, I was just doing like waking up very early at 7, doing yoga for 20, 30 minutes. And that was my way of telling myself that I had that work-life balance, as in I would fit life in front, like just before work. So that at the end, because in the evening I didn't dare to do anything. I was just like letting the thing rule my life. And now after what I think after 2 years, I started to change my way of doing things. So I started to put into the calendar of my manager, like, okay, this is the moment I do yoga on Tuesday evening. And
Mm.
unless we have huge emergencies like a steer code the next day, like the big meeting the next day, then I would go to yoga for 1 hour. I would eat, blah blah, and then I would reconnect after that if it's necessary. And then on Thursday, I would have my off night where I would be doing stuff with my friends. So then I just know that that day is like everyone is aligned on that. And of course, it depends on the project because sometimes it's doable, and it depends on the manager because some people respect that more than others. But yeah, I think that's also putting my boundaries more is it's a good thing. And now I also say when I feel like it's too much or that I feel like
Mm.
there's stuff to be done. Also because yeah, I'm way less like yeah, I let it rule my life way less now.
Now looking back, Gilmy, and you just described the periods of intensity and stress. Is there something you would tell your younger self to do differently, or would you do anything differently in a way that might be a bit less toxic or a bit less intense? Or was this sort of the recipe, or just the way you do it?
I think that there's no recipe, and I think that all the experiences and all the mistakes and all the road bumps in the way always shape us in whoever we are without like
Mm.
this sometimes like without a very tiny one thing that we are even unconscious about, maybe we would act slightly different today.
Mm.
I think that, and also, I mean, yeah, I went to yoga class the other day, and my yoga teacher was saying that there's this god in Hindu where they say that it's the god of obstacles, but it's also the god of taking out the obstacles. And I found
Mm.
that very interesting, like that duality. It's like in order to sometimes even realize that you have imposter syndrome, you need to go through all these really hard steps to actually
Mm.
tell yourself like, oh, I actually need to face that at some point. Actually, it needs to be an obstacle in my way so that
Mm.
I can like learn about it. Yeah, I don't think that I had the it's not that I had the best recipe or for anything. I just very much I'm more a person who looks forward than backwards. And I think that I wouldn't even know actually like what I could do differently. Maybe I could say like, yeah, try to work on your self-confidence like earlier. Try to find yourself, like find who you are and what your strengths are way earlier. But I did ask myself all those questions. It's just that I didn't have the experiences at the time in order to even answer those questions in the first place. So I don't think that I could have done things differently.
Cool. I love, the way you still seem very positive about everything and seems to be, taking time for things like this. And I really appreciate that. If you look a bit forward, you've been in consulting for a while and everything, and I'm not sure how much you can share based on your current employment, but any ideas for future adventures and next steps or uh, later next steps?
Yeah, I've been so the end goal, like the big goal is still to go back to Vietnam. It's being pushed a little bit for a couple years. I was supposed to be in Vietnam already now, but yeah, like a few personal things. So then I'm going to transfer. I'm asking for a transfer to another a European city because I just want
Mm-hmm.
to spend a bit more time in Europe. And as well, I think that one of the big goals I've been having in my Trello for my life has been to build my YouTube channel back or
Mm.
to invest more in my podcast. But I think that yeah, like when I'm working, it's just really demanding. And so
Mm.
having the energy to like edit, write scripts and all those things, it takes energy. And
Yes.
yeah, and sometimes on the weekend when you're working so hard in during the week, it's just like, oh, I just want to chill. I just want to like have coffee and kind of like enjoy the present moment. And it's not that
Mm.
writing the script is not enjoying the present moment, but it's just really demanding still in terms of energy. So yeah, those are
Mm.
my two things, like moving back to Vietnam and then maybe doing my
Mm.
side things.
I'm sure a lot of people would love to listen to your stuff, especially our people from OB, after listening to this, especially having seen a very candid side of you. If you would move to Vietnam, would this still be consulting, or do you also?
It depends, I think, on the opportunities. Like if I find that the types of projects that we are doing in Vietnam is
Mm.
very aligned to my experience because I'm also starting to specialize right now. Going with this imposter syndrome thing, I think that's I'm trying to find like the things that I'm interested in. I'm trying to specialize within some practice areas, some at BCG because I've been generalist until now. I've done really like different things, which has, by the way, yeah, I think for people who go into consulting. I think that it's very from I learned so much doing so many different things, but
Mm.
I also put myself in those situations where I felt that imposter syndrome way more. Because actually, a lot of people they go into BCG, they're like, yeah, I'm going to do everything. But then after 1 year, they're like, oh, I'm going to only do some due diligence, or I'm only going to do oil and gas, or I'm only going to do whatever. And go like doing things repeatedly, it helps you to build your self-confidence and your sense of legitimacy on that topic as well. I was not like that. I was just like doing everything because I was like, oh, I want to learn about everything. And so I put myself in the difficult situation as well. Would I have done things differently?
Mm.
No, because I think that it was very like enriching and it was what I went here for. So I wouldn't have
Yeah.
done things differently. But now, like knowing all of that, I'm like, okay, it's enough. We're stopping to learn about everything, a little bit of
Mm.
everything. We're going to start learning a lot about something. So yeah, I think that that is like the immediate step going with the moving to maybe to Amsterdam and then
Mm.
yeah, trying to go back to Vietnam with that specialty in mind. I'll see like if there
Mm.
are opportunities. So yeah.
Awesome. I would be very excited to have more people like you and you in Vietnam, and to build and gather a bit of a video and returnee community here, and try to do stuff here. And more people are coming, so it's always very positive for me to hear more intent, at least letters of intent to come. Hope it works out.
Yes, and so
Um,
many are very entrepreneurial. I think that's very interesting as well.
yes.
Like all these young people going and building stuff. It sounds so,
Um,
yeah, like wow, interesting.
yes, and my point of view on this is, I think it's partly out of necessity as well. I don't think Vietnam employment market provides the same structure and opportunities elsewhere. And so one of the the prime options is basically building a business here, and I think that's where the most excitement and also the most opportunity lies. And so that's why many people choose this path. Also because perhaps the alternatives are not as the same in Paris or London or New York as of now. Yeah.
Mm, mm. But maybe like some people will build something that's like so
Yeah.
great that then other people will want to move back to work for that thing.
Yeah, yeah, that's the goal. Look, I've asked you before, what would you advise your younger self, and I would perhaps double click on that a little bit, but perhaps abstracting more as to if there are perhaps OV females, women early in their studies, would love to aspire to a similar career to you. What would you tell them? It doesn't even have to be advice. But what would you tell, and perhaps it's easier to envision your younger self, what would you tell 21-year-old Kieu?
I would definitely say like just keep pushing, just keep doing like just keep being very hardworking and yeah, pushing because it's things pay off. And also the second thing is that like when things are meant to be, it will just click in a very natural way. Like you don't have like you have to be hardworking and you have to be diligent in whatever you do. But the second thing is that you also have to accept like that there are some outcomes. If it's not meant to be, then it will not be. And you don't have to like if you feel like you're hitting against the wall, like just stop and
Mm-hmm.
just go another way. That's two.
Mm-hmm.
I think three is be very reflective about your experience. Like I have a notebook for my emotions, like a personal life kind of thing, and then I have a notebook for my career. And I write after every of my projects, like what I liked, what I didn't like, what I was good at, and all those things. So I try to really reflect on my experience so that I could extract stuff, especially like after 3 years, what I have learned, like where am I good at naturally? And so yeah, be very reflective, journal about your career and about your personal life. And the fourth thing is, I think that thing also helps to build the last thing, which is self-confidence. I think that, yeah, as a woman of color, as a Vietnamese, generally Vietnamese people are very hardworking, and Vietnamese girls, when they grow up, like their parents put a lot. And I'm not saying that Vietnamese boys do not have pressure, but I think that Vietnamese
Mm-hmm.
girls have this double pressure of like you have to be very hardworking because especially when you're an immigrant, etc., then your parents want you to have a better future. So they put a lot of investment into your career. They are very hardworking themselves so that you could have a better future. And then the second thing is, as a Vietnamese woman, you're also expected to have all these. You're supposed to know how to manage your family, to know how to cook, to
Yeah,
be pretty, and all those things. And so, and you also have to question yourself and be humble. And no, 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 no. It's a lot of stuff. And I think that do not forget in all of that to build your self-confidence in who you are, what you're good at, and really focusing on those things that nobody can take from you.
I love that. I was about to end, but I would need to ask, like, what does your journaling process look like? When did you start? At what age? And like
Oh
pen
yeah.
and paper? Is it laptop? Like how?
It's only paper for now, but I'm about to buy a
Uh,
Markable because I have
mhm.
like 10 notebooks. I started when I was 6. Yeah.
Wow, so early,
Yeah, I started
and
really
then
early.
consistent until today.
Not really consistent because I did like from
Mm.
6 to maybe like until I was a teenager. And then I
Yeah.
stopped for a couple of years and then I did like consistently for 1 year when I was like a teenager, 2 years. And then when I was in prépa, I didn't journal at all. And then I started again in 2019. So I was 23
Mm.
and it has been
Mm.
really consistent until now. And it's not like every day I have to write something. At first, it was when I was a kid, it was more like descriptive. It was more like me
Mm.
trying to tell the whatever was happening was going through my mind. And now it's
Yeah.
way more me describing and analyzing my own feelings. So it's like, why do I feel the way that I feel? And then I just dig like into the whys very, very deep. And I try to make connections with my past, the stuff that happened, blah, blah. And for the career thing, it's a separate thing. So I write after every project. I write after every internship. And yeah, I ask all these questions like classic, like when I do my coaching, I write a lot as well. Like I really prep my coaching case sessions, like, oh, when I'm 80, what would I want my 80 self to say about, whatever my life is, or yeah, trying to think about what I'm good at. And that evolves as well. So I try to do that like every year, to take a step back and be like, okay, ask myself again that question of what am I good at? What do I think like a good life is? What is my higher purpose? And the higher purpose thing is like, it's a very broad question. And so I think that it defines itself year after year.
I'm asking because I'm journaling. I'm a fellow journaler as well, but mine is very. I do it every evening before sleeping on my Apple Notes on my iPhone, and it often like there's no structure to it, but I will often release the thoughts that might still prevent me from sleeping to just package it there and then put my phone away and then go to sleep. And often it ends up to be a more almost a to-do slash motivational note to myself of, you want to achieve this and this is why you gotta get up tomorrow morning and give it your all. Like what's your time of the day to journal? Like, and is it 15 minutes? Is it 60 minutes? Like how intense do you journal?
It's really, when I journal, it's usually for 15 minutes plus, because it's a like psychoanalysis type of thing. It's
Uh,
bullet points. I think that
uh,
I'm very consultancy in my way of journaling. It's like,
uh,
why, what, how, or like, it's like why, and it's like you have the bullet points, sub bullet points, stuff like that, and a lot of like arrows making connections between stuff. But yeah, usually I meditate before I journal. I try to, so that I have that sense of like extracting from my thoughts. Yeah, I don't do it every day like you, so I think that's why like it's more sporadic. It's like, oh, today I feel all these things, and I want to understand why I feel all these things, so then I start journaling.
And do you make the entries neat and collect them and bind them, or do you throw them away?
No, no, I have a notebook for it. So like every
Okay.
time I finish a notebook, then I would take another one. But now with I hope that soon with a markable, I can just package them all digitally, because it's very hard like to find stuff again.
Super interesting. We diverted a bit, but I think nonetheless there are many people journaling out there, and if not, I think personally it's a great way to reflect, or even it's just enjoyable as a process itself. It doesn't
Yeah.
even have to be so much an outcome. It's just relaxing as well.
Yeah. When did you start?
I was on and off with it as well. I started 4 or 5 years ago, just before I moved to Singapore. So lived in Singapore the last 3 years, and the move was quite a big one in terms of life change. And so I just started with a blank slate, blank sheet, coming to a new country, no one knowing me, and I could almost reinvent myself. And so I wanted to be intentional about that. And so I journaled out there and just carried on that habit until today. And I just enjoy the process. Yeah, that's what I meant. Sometimes it doesn't even have any outcome or any specific purpose. It's just the 10 minutes that I have with myself and for myself, which
Yeah.
is sometimes quite nice.
Yeah.
Uh,
I agree.
Cool. Kieu My, thank you so much. How can our members and audience connect with you and follow your work?
Instagram, LinkedIn. I have all of the classic social media. And if they want
Yeah.
to see my past self talking about how I got into consulting, there's my YouTube channel as well, where I was like talking about that.
Cool. What would they need to search in YouTube to find that?
Kiumi's way.
Kieu My's way. Okay.
Yes.
Here you go. Let me try to link it after the recording. Thank you so much, Kieu My. It was wonderful speaking to you. And yeah, we keep in touch. And I hope to see you in Vietnam as well, either as visitor or one day even as a resident and fellow neighbor. Here.
Yes. 100%. Thanks a lot, Quang.
That's it for today. If you enjoyed this, you will love the OV community. Learn more at overseasvietnamese.com.